screen. Let me share the screen, and of course, yeah. So I think we go to the drive to modernization. So 18. Oh, we did this one. Did we do the drive to modernization?
No, I think that was where we ended.
Okay, good. Yeah, so now modernization refers to the processes of economic, political, social, and cultural transformation. So when we say modernization, that took place in modern Latin America after 1850. So certain changes took place in Latin America after 1850. And the drive to modernization took place in the second half of the 19th century. So that is from 1850 onwards. The leaders of American countries. So this one, the topographical area can be Latin American countries realized that Europe and US were far ahead of them. This was the time that they sat and saw that they were lagging behind if you compared them to Europe and US. And so this means the Latin American countries were lagging behind. And so from 1850, areas such as industrialization, transportation, and communication, foreign trade and culture experienced modernization. Now, there were changes in the way they did these things there. Now, aims of modernization. They wanted to increase revenue. Here, they wanted to promote the welfare of their own people so that they could improve their living standard. And again, diversification of the economy. They wanted to move from merely exporting agricultural produce and minerals to processing these goods through industrialization. And so that was also one. And again, central government control over national territories. Central government control over national. They wanted to see an expansion of transportation and communication systems so that the central government would have control over their own national territories. Yes, and that was also another objective of the modernization or aim. Then they wanted to eliminate military intervention. They wanted to see elimination of violence in public life. They did not want military to take their gun and then usurp power. No, so they wanted to see an end to that one. So factors that aided modernization. Now there were two factors. So we look at the internal factors. So we have internal relative political stability. By 1850, most of the Latin American countries had been able to solve the problems related to establishing a variable form of government. So viable form of government that would be able to move the country forward. They had all accepted the idea of republicanism and Republican states, state also. Pro-modernization ideology. There was also what we refer to as pro-modernization ideology. The leaders of the various countries accepted this idea of modernization. So they were all for. They saw that they were lagging behind comparing to Europe and US. And so all of them were ready to ensure that uh, Latin American countries would become modernized. Again, there were some external factors that aided modernization. Let's look at them. One was end of foreign interventions, no threat from outside Europe and US. Support from Europe and the US, they have support from Europe and US. Latin American countries got capital, expertise, immigrants, and technology from Europe. The Europeans helped to advance the processes of modernization. They helped. Typographical error helped. HELPED. The P did not come. Helped to advance the process of modernization. Now, so that word is helped. Where is it? Yeah, helped. I've added it. Yeah, they help to advance the process of modernization. So the relative political stability in the countries encouraged the Europeans to float loans and to set up trading companies that traded with the various Latin American countries, and by so doing, they became rich so that they could be able to get money to do other things, especially to diversify certain things and more in their bid to modernize several aspects of their society. So industrialization in Europe led to the demand for raw materials and resources like nitrates, copper, rubber, and palm oil, as well as food items to feed the growing population in Europe. And these were found there. So we know that then they would become viable anyway. So now the sector that experienced modernization, yeah, having seen what is modernization and the aims for modernization, let's see sector that experienced modernization. So industrialization was one of such sectors. They took loans from European countries and brought in machines to process their new materials into finished goods, passed laws that allowed machines to be brought into their countries free from duties, encouraged Europeans with the necessary skills and expertise to come in and set up factories. They built railroads, improved port facilities, and built modern communication systems. So by 1900, textile industries, sawmills, uh, farm mills, shoe factories, food processing factories were set up. So all these things were set up. Now, there was also foreign trade. Yeah, foreign trade also experienced modernization. Many of the bigger countries greatly expanded foreign trade, particularly to Europe. So, for example, Argentina's foreign trade jumped by 7 times between 1853 and 1873. Yeah, that 20-year period. So Mexico's foreign trade expanded 4 times. Mexico also expanded 4 times between 1877 and 1900. Brazil grew 7 times between 1833 and 1889. So that'll tell you how foreign trade also experienced modernization. Then transportation and communication also experienced modernization. There was no proper national means of transportation apart from parts and carriages drawn from horses and cattle or mules. Due to lack of effective transportation and communication systems, Indian communities or provinces were not linked. So that one is were not linked. Let me insert that word. Yeah, were not linked. Were not linked together. So socioeconomically, the farmers were unable to transport their farm produce to the cities to sell. Central government were unable to effectively administer their area. However, from the 1850s, railroads, telegraph lines, shopping lines were constructed. All these were constructed. Please, let me correct some few things. So the one who did the slides for me. Yeah, were constructed. Yeah, so were constructed to ensure the progress of the Latin American countries. The first railway line was built in Cuba in 1838. By 1889, Brazil railroad miles had increased to 6,000. Argentina began with 7 miles in 1857. By 1900, it had grown to 10,200 miles and to 21,700 yeah, 21,700 miles by 1914, the time that World War I broke out. Effects of modernization. Let's look at effects of modernization on the Latin American countries or the impact. So, one, emergence of middle sectors, immigrants and urban dwellers, land ownership, debt, tillage, and slavery. So these emerge. We had middle sectors, immigrants and urban dwellers, land ownership, debt, peonage, and slavery. So there was also the issue of urbanization. So let's find out, as for slavery, we are conversant with it because we are doing, so let's find out debt, peonage. Yeah, so that you throw more light on that. Urbanization, there was also high dependency on even development, monoculture. Yeah, so and monoculture. Now, after the departure of Rosas in 1852, Argentina began So, okay, let's use Argentina as an example. Let's look at modernization in Argentina in the second half of the 19th century. Now, so yeah, after the departure of Rosas, we have touched on Rosas when we're doing the introductory. So, in 1852, Argentina began to settle down. A new constitution was drawn in 1853 that made Argentina a federal republic, but gave a great deal of power to the president, who had power to intervene in the provinces if necessary. Two men from Buenos Aires dominated politics during this period. These men were, so we had Bartolome Mito and Domingo Sarmiento. Now, these two men generally supported a policy of modernization using European ideas, expertise, and capital. So they were all those who really welcomed modernization. But to them, they wanted it to be modeled on European lines, especially their ideas, how they thought about these issues, their expertise, and their capital. They could be drawn in to help modernize Argentina. Now, after 1874, big owners of property became the new leaders. However, rapid development took place. The question of whether Buenos Aires should dominate or not was resolved in 1880. Now, the 1880 Constitution of Argentina settled the issue by making the city of Buenos Aires the capital of the whole republic as the federal district, separate from the provinces of Buenos Aires, which now had a new capital known as La Plata. Now, factor that aided modernization in Argentina is the same as the previous one. So I don't think we need to waste time here. As we have just discussed, the factors. So they are all there. The quest for change and all that we just saw. Now, sector that, okay, so transportation and communication also experience modernization. Railroads, telegraph lines, cable lines, shopping lines, port facilities, and refrigerator ships were provided to improve transportation and communication systems in Argentina. These were done through the availability of European expertise, capital, and technology. Railroads grew from 10,000 miles in 1900 to 21,000 miles in 1914, just about 14 years. That's all. Foreign trade also saw changes. Argentina's foreign trade increased very markedly in the last decades of the 19th century, and this resulted from a sharp increase in grain exports, as well as the use of new agricultural fields. So the allocation of more land to the cultivation of wheat and other grains between 1872 and 1895. Then, of course, the growth of alfalfa grass, the importation of better breeds from Europe to improve and increase to improve. Yeah. So the adoption of to improve the Argentine animals and the adoption of penning of animals all improved and increased the cattle and sheep available for export. So you saw that this were what do you call it, significant changes. The new refrigerator ships to export meat to Europe increased exports. All this made it possible for foreign trade to jump to 30 million gold pesos in 1870 and to 390 million gold pesos in 1910. So that would tell you how catastrophic this jumped, and how it catapulted. Anyway, now industrialization also saw a facelift, significant one in Argentina. So foreign companies were encouraged to come in and set up factories to process the raw materials of the country. The government granted them duty-free importation of machines and other equipment they needed to operate in Argentina. Textile industry, shoe factories, meat packing factories, food processing factories, flour mills were set up in Argentina. And so that will tell you how industrialized Argentina had become. By 1910, Argentina could boast of several industries that helped to reduce the country's dependence on Europe for such consumer goods as shoes and processed food. So they were producing them locally. Agriculture also saw significant changes. Yeah, also saw significant, witnessed significant changes. Agriculture. Now, a number of innovations were introduced that transformed the country's agriculture at this time. That is, from 1850s, yeah, to 1900s. Now, new breeds or better breeds of animals, fencing in of animals and growing of alfalfa grass for feeding animals were introduced in Argentina, and better cattle and sheep could be produced for European market. Refrigerator ships were also introduced in 1876, and it encouraged, or these ships encouraged farmers to pen their animals and feed them with better grass to generate more income from animal rearing. New crops were also introduced in Argentina, for example, wheat and coffee. The introduction of pampas also helped to improve agriculture in Argentina. And in 1876, the Avellaneda Land Law was passed, and this was passed to allow this was introduced to allow immigrants to have access to land for cultivation, and this greatly improved agriculture in the area. Now, yeah, so how did this impact, or what were the effects of this modernization in Argentina? One was urbanization, dependency, high rate of immigration, so people will come all the way because they have become urbanized. Industries have been there, so people will come, it will draw people. So many. There was the emergence of middle sectors. They supported the radical parties and challenged the domination of the rural aristocratic families and helped to break their hold on society and politics in the early 20th century. A typical example was introduction of the Chinese Penal Law of 1912. And this law was introduced to make changes in the electoral systems of Argentina. So here, secret ballot was replaced with acclamation, proper acclamation. All males who were 18 and above were allowed to vote. With the Suez Penal Law, with the Spanish penal law, the radical party in Argentina had chance to elect their leader as the president. Okay, so how the problems were addressed in the Latin America after 1850? How problems were addressed in Latin America? So the problems, yes, after 1850. Now the problem the Latin American went through since the colonial times to the period before and after modernization were solved in three ways. One, the use of radical revolution, parliamentary changes, and three, strong men getting or coming into power. This how come this is how the problems were resolved, and that contributed to modernizing Latin American countries. Now, so let's look at the Mexican Revolution of 1910. The Mexican Revolution. So how the changes that came to Mexico referred to as the Mexican Revolution in 1910. So the liberal faction gained control in Mexico between 1866 and 1876. So Benito Juarez, 1866 to 72, and he strengthened Mexican feelings of nationhood and unity. So you saw that the need for you, yeah. So nationhood, you belonging to the nation, so and the unity, the need for us to unite. He was the one who strengthened that Mexicans' feelings of nationhood, that you belong to a nation, and so you should seek its you should ensure the success of, or have the nation at heart and then seek its, so the how to have an idea, talk about your country, talk about its unity and all that. So these are the issues, and I think Benito did well in this direction. And so he also granted amnesty to many people. He limited the powers of the church and local cordillos. Yeah, and local cordillos. He established free and compulsory primary education for the poor. For the poor. Yeah, so he did that. Now Sebastian Leggio de Tilaja also ruled from 1872 to 76, and there was economic development during his time. His term was more peaceful than even Juarez. In 1876, Porfirio Diaz revolted, and that's very important. Porfirio Diaz revolted against Tejada, and so he then called for election to legitimate to make to legitimize his rule after Jada resigned due to the revolt. So Diaz, or Porfirio Diaz, assumed the presidency in 1876. So Porfirio Diaz became the president of Mexico from 1876 to 1911, and he became a dictator after he assumed full control. His election in 1876 implies that he implied that he was to rule until 1880. In 1880, he abided his pledge for no election and named his successor, General Manuel uh, Gonzalez. So he was the one who took over. Now he set up the UNIS, that is informal police, to arrest and imprison all opponents of his rule. Diaz. We are looking at them because he was a dictator. And so you know how dictators, the way they do their things. He stood against workers whenever they went on a strike. A typical example was what happened in 1906 when the oil factory worker at Puebla went on strike. He failed to find solution to the accumulated abuses inherited since the colonial times, issues related to land distribution, labor, education, and the church did not bother. In 1908, he informed an American press that he was no more going to contest in the 1911 election. However, in 1910, he made a U-turn. Yeah, he made a U-turn. So, Francisco Madero, who was a great landowner and a politician from the northern part of Mexico, did not give up but planned to contest the presidential election of 1911. So in 1910, Francisco published a book, Presidential Succession, and analyzed lack of democracy in Mexico. He was arrested and imprisoned by Porfirio Diaz. So Madero escaped to US, and after some time, he issued a declaration against Diaz. Mexicans expressed their support for him, and in the end, a rebellion took place. Diaz resigned and left for Europe. So the Mexican Revolution of 1910 occurred because of the dictatorship rule of Porfirio Diaz and failure of the Mexican government to deal with the accumulated abuses inherited since the colonial times or the colonial period. And that is what actually triggered the revolution, where that changes, what that changes. Some of the accumulated abuses or demands of the Mexican population. So one was land redistribution. They wanted land to be redistributed. Then elimination of the church control over education. They did not want the church. They did not want the church, the Catholic Church, to control education. Elimination of foreign control over the economy and culture of Mexico. No, they wanted that one. They wanted to get rid of that. And separation of the church from the state. So prevention of the church from intervening in the affairs of the state. They did not want the church at all to come closer to governance. They wanted a total separation. And then again, securing adequate wages and better working conditions. So they wanted more pay, wanted good working conditions. They also wanted security for the aged aged persons, and they wanted education for all, everybody to be well educated, and wider participation in governance for the masses instead of limiting it to specific group of people. So they wanted more participation. So aftermath of the Mexican Revolution, so what the aftermath was. So Madero became the president of Mexico after the revolution. He faced challenges. Big lands were burnt, and the peasants demanded a share from the available land. Fire was set up in the countryside. A hacienda system was destroyed by the peasants, etc. So all these things. Now he was unable to carry out revolutionary reforms, and due to that, the revolutionary peasants lost trust in him. He faced opposition from the Emiliano Zapata and Francisco Pancho. In 1912, he was killed, and General Huerta was chosen as the new president. In 1913, Huerta was overthrown by a group of revolutionary leaders, and they were referred to as constitutionalists. Yeah, constitutionalists. So we have Venustiano, then Carranza, Alvaro Obregón, and Puchaco Elias Caus. Now he was overthrown because he attempted to restore the Porfirio type of regime during his tenure. So Madero did that, and so they got him out of the scene. And these people were very important. Take note of the 1916. Yeah, they take note of these constitutionalist people. These constitutionalists. Okay. Now, so let's look at Venustiano Carranza administration, and that is from 1917 to 1920. And yeah, 1917 to 1920. Carranza ensured drafting of the 1917 Constitution of Mexico. He was the one who saw to the drafting of that. In March 1917, an election was held to legitimize Carranza's presidency. Yeah. So the Constitution outlined measures to deal with the state, land, labor, church, and education. So that's very important. You need to have an insight in these aspects of the Constitution, how the Constitution tackled the issues of the state, land, labor, church, and education. Now, the American state was defined as a federal government or state, but it controlled everything in the country. Now, the president had power to intervene in the affairs of the provinces. The state has supreme power over the subjects, no vice president. Now, land. The state was to take over land of individuals and corporate bodies and redistribute it. So it gave the state the power. The Constitution gave the state the power to take, to take over land of individuals and corporate bodies and redistribute it. Yeah, the government was to be the owner of all land and resources. All land acquisitions since 1857 were revoked or cancelled. There was the introduction of the Ejido system, and this was what do you call it, a communal ownership of land, where members of the community could collectively hold land together and redistribute it according to the needs of the people. Yeah, so that was introduced. Now, it was a land reform aimed at redistributing land to rural communities, so to be redistributed and everybody would benefit. And indigenous people, land could not be sold, rented, or used as collateral. National organizations were set up to take charge of land distribution system with land district bodies. Now, labor, what is said about labor? A new labor code was passed to regulate labor. Now, minimum wage and salaries were increased or improved. The Constitution fixed minimum working hours for the people or for the workers. Accident protection was provided. Pensions for workers were also brought on board. No child labor, meaning under 12 years, that is 12 to 16 years, would only work a minimum or a maximum. This is a maximum of 6 hours per day and no more. Now, the church in education, how it dealt with the church, the issue of the church in education, where these issues were spelled out. All church and organizations were forbidden from holding any property. Church buildings were declared as state property. Churches could not sue or be sued. It had no standing before the law. Ministers of the religion were only considered as practicing a profession. The assembly had the right to determine the number of ministers to take in charge of a church. The church was separated from the state. Powers and religion were and religious worship, powers and religious worship were handed over to the states. Any religion could be established in Mexico. All church institutions and organizations were prevented from establishing or managing primary and secondary schools. And private schools were allowed but to remain secular under public supervision. Yeah, they were allowed, but they should remain secular and they had to be supervised under public supervision. Okay, so most of the articles in the Constitution were radical, and as a result, Carranza did not agree to everything in the Constitution. This was because of the radical nature of the Constitution. So I think we just went through what is stipulated, what is said about the state, about the land, everything. Yeah, and that we have just gone through. Now, so this was because of its radical nature, as I've already said. So after Carranza and his army had been able to kill Zapata in a war, Carranza was unable to expand his reign because he had become weak. In 1919, he announced his successor, and this resulted in a revolt led by Obregón against Carranza. So Carranza was killed, and in the end, Obregón became the legitimate president of Mexico on December 1st, 1920. So let's look at Alvaro Obregón, and that is 1920 to 1924. Alvaro Obregón. Now, one, he set up National Confederation of Labor. He supported workers and sought to give them freedom to organize and demand their rights. He provided better working conditions for workers. Two, he set up National Agrarian Commission to redistribute about 3 million acres of land to people in the rural communities as community land. He did that. Three, promotion of education. He promoted education. He appointed Jose Vasconcelos, who strongly believed in Indian culture and traditions, as the Minister of Education. And so Vasconcelos set up the House of Culture, and this was for the basic schools, which recruited volunteers who had necessary skills and abilities of training to teach various basic schools, like history, to teach various basic subjects. I'm talking about subjects like history, agriculture, law, sport, music, reading, writing, and arithmetic. About 1,000 basic schools were set up during the time of Obregón. Now, again, Vasconcelos encouraged the development of national culture. He did that. So, in example, for us to explain maybe 4 contributions of Alvaro Obregón, I think very simple. These are the very, very simple. The slides are very, very simple. And now this one, I need to just go through the slides. That's all. This was based on indigenous culture and civilization. He encouraged people like artisans and musicians to draw their idea of Mexican history in culture and public wars. In 1924, Obregón selected Puchaco Elias Calles as his successor. However, most people were unhappy. So Kais was known as a more radical member with radical ideas. Most people were not happy with Obregon's appointment of Kais as his successor because of his anti-clerical views. So Kais became the president of Mexico from 1924 to 28 and 28 to 34. In 1928, his tenure ended and Obregon was re-elected as the president of Mexico. However, Obregon was assassinated. This created a political vacuum in Mexico. So, yeah, following the assassination of Obregon. So, Caiz stepped in and took over the presidency position for the second time until he handed over to Lazaro Cardenas in 1934. Now, let's look at what Caiz did. He established a formal party known as the National Revolutionary Party in 1929 to be in charge of organizing free and fair succession of one leader after the other. Again, he redistributed land restricted under Obregon to the rural areas. And he also established agricultural credit bank to give loans to the rural communities for them to make good use of their land. For them to make good use of their land. Yeah, he also supplied seeds, fertilizers, and other important tools for farmers. Yeah, he gave them to farmers. Yeah, so that was it. Now, crucial happenings under him. There was a priest strike between 1926 and 1929 due to Kai's extreme measures against the Roman Catholic Church. As we saw, what he did to the church and education, we saw. So it means that you're taking everything from the church, and they could not even be sealed. They could not seal and be sealed, and they were, in fact, as we just reduce them to nothing. So this uprising was called Quesorio Revolt, which was organized by supporters of the church in Mexico. So the priest strike, as the name implies, came to an end in 1929 after a secret meeting was held between the church and Cars. So from 1929, a group of people came up with ideas that they wanted changes in Mexico. Now, they wanted the state to fight against corruption. They wanted to display of wealth by some of, the display of wealth by some of the revolutionary leaders and the implementation of the provision of the 1970 Constitution with regard to land and labor. So they wanted some of these issues to be resolved. And so in 1933, Kai selected some of these men who were led by Lazaro Cardenas to draw a social plan with respect to land, workers, peasants, and general population. So in 1934, Lazaro Cardenas was chosen as the president of Mexico. Now, what did he also do? Lazaro, he fought against corruption. He abolished all gambling casinos. He reduced the number of big shows that were carried out. He dissolved the existing cabinets imposed on him by Cais and appointed his own to take over. He redistributed land. About 44 to 50 million acres of land were redistributed. He set up confederation of rural working people to organize the people in the various communities and sought to promote their interest by passing legislation in their favor. He also encouraged government factories to produce various goods like sugar. He also set up National Bank to give loans to people in the rural communities. He set up National Development Bank also to give loans to various enterprises. He set up the PEMES, in 1938. So the PEMES was a national petroleum corporation to manage and control Mexican resources. He reorganized the National Revolution Party and divided it into 4 sections: labor, military, corporate, and agrarian section. So that's what he did. Now, let's look at achievements of the Mexican Revolution of 1910, what it achieved. The revolution achieved such a complete reorganization and reorientation of the country, and that it was time to settle down and consolidate what had been achieved and move on. Land was redistributed to people in the rural communities. Majority of the Mexican population felt part of the political system. The hold of foreigners on the economy was broken. There was promotion of education for all, increase in literacy rate, and reduction of influence of the church. So these were some of the impacts or the achievements of the Mexican Revolution. So if I ask you in any exams to explain four achievements of the Mexican Revolution of 1910, I think this is very simple thing that will be explained. Yeah, and we are going to have the explanation of the redistribution and all that. Okay. Okay, so now the reform option. So battle and the welfare. The welfare. So the state of Uruguay, 1897 to 1910. Yeah, so the unsettled state of Uruguay before 1903. So formation of Uruguay. The 1828 event between Argentina and Brazil. So Caudillos wielded enormous political power in Uruguay. Examples of Caudillos were Rivera, and then Oribe and La Valleja. Now, the rivalry among these Caudillos gave rise to two main political groups. It gave rise to two main political groups. Okay, I think let's break for about 5 minutes. Hello, are you with me?
Yes, Doc.
Yeah, so let's have short break about 5 minutes and recommends. Okay, sir.
Okay, though.
Okay, I think we can continue.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so formation of Uruguay. So I was talking about the fact that the 1828 event between Argentina and Brazil. Okay, now Cordilleros, and they were the enormous political powers. And these Cordilleros were the military and political leaders who actually they were the authoritarian powers, and sometimes through charisma, and maybe so they could even control armed groups. So they were very powerful. In fact, the Cordilleros were very, very powerful there. So so we have some examples. So Rivera was one of them. Then Orib. So La Valija, these were some of the Cordilleros. So in yeah, so the rival among these Cordilleros gave rise to two main political groups. So we have the Blancos and then the Colorados. The Colorados. So the Blancos were basically the conservatives, while the Colorados were liberals. Now the Blancos were mainly they were mainly big cattle owners in the countryside, whereas the Colorados were mainly in the city. In the city, So Montevideo, they were there in the city. Now, between 1828 and 1903, Uruguay experienced political instability. There were civil wars, frequent changes in government, and a lot of rebellions. Now, in the late 19th century, Uruguay began to see some socio-economic developments. A lot of people from Spain, France, and Portugal came to settle in Uruguay. So they came to live there. They came to settle there. Now, this period saw construction of railroads, telegraph lines, shopping lines were all constructed. Gas services were initiated in 1853. First bank in 1870, in 1857 was built. Running water in 1871, improvement in breeding techniques, fencing, etc. were all introduced in Uruguay. So by 1875, food processing factories, shoe factories, textile industries, etc. were set up in Uruguay. However, majority of the people were still illiterate. They were still illiterate. So now let's see, say Bachiri. They say Bachiri Odonis. So they say Bachiri. Now he was a member of the Colorado Party, and he was the founder of the newspaper Edia in 1886. He advocated for an end of Cordillero's rule. He didn't want such people, such military and political leaders who were so authoritarian and had power through charisma and other. No, he wanted an end to their rule, Cordillero's rule. Introduction, he wanted introduction of constitutional rule that will be kind of democracy, fair election, amnesty in administration by government. So in the 1903 election, he contested and fortunately he won. The Brancos were not happy when he won the election, when Jose Bache won the election. So this led to a civil war between the two parties in the country. In the end, Saravia, the leader of the Brancos, was killed. So the Brancos sought to separate 6 provinces out of the 19 from the rest of the country and rule the section as a self-governing state. So and that's what they set up. Now, so Bachil granted the Brancos general amnesty and incorporated them as part of his government. Between 1903 and 1907, he used his time to ensure peace and order in Uruguay. In 1907, he left office and moved to Switzerland to study their political system. His idea was that the country should not be in the hands of one president, but there should be a body that will rule as executives to reduce the possibility of dictatorship. He returned to Uruguay in 1911, 16 days before the next election. He contested and once again Jose Bache won. Now let's look at his reforms. One, there were reforms in education. He sought the assistance of the United States of America, free and compulsory primary education for all children. Yeah, so he introduced free and compulsory education for all children. Then the liberal arts curriculum of Washington D.C. secondary schools were introduced in Montevideo. Then his minister in Washington, Azevedo Diaz, asked the U.S. State Department of Primary and Secondary School textbooks and curricula. So medicine, commerce, architecture, etc., were introduced in the secondary schools and post-secondary schools. Americans were employed to run new secondary and post-secondary schools in Uruguay. Adult education was also promoted in Uruguay. So these were some of his reforms in the area of education. In the area of industry, he adopted the protectionist policy for industry. It imposed tariffs on foreign products, favoring machinery and raw materials imports. So it supported imports. And then those exports, more taxes were put on them. Now, industrial plants were set up, cattle and sheep were slaughtered and processed for exports. Basic enterprises like power and insurance, which were under the hands of private companies, were taken over by the government. In the area of health, he invested in public health infrastructure. He constructed hospitals, clinics across the country. He launched public health campaigns to educate his people about sanitation, ways of eradicating disease, etc. He did all these things. In fact, he also provided health insurance scheme for the people, so that we see that some of all these things are history. Some of these things that we are doing, we learn from history a lot. He employed more doctors and nurses. His health reforms improve quality of life of individuals, political and social stability. Now, in the area of, so there were also political reforms or institutional reorganization of government. This was done in 1913. He wanted to replace the presidency with a nine-member collegial executive inspired by the Swiss model. So in 1917, he introduced a constitution. 9 persons were elected to form a National Council of Administration to share executive power with the president. There was a provision of 2 house assembly, upper house and lower house. Proportional representation was also included, where the party with the highest votes will take 2/3 of the position, and the next party will take 1/3. So the constitution helped to foster unity, ensured separation of powers, and checks and balances. In the area of labor, there were equally significant reforms introduced by Jose Bache. So he passed laws that favored the working forces in the country. He also allowed workers to form trade unions that would fight for their rights. Laws were fixed for minimum wages, pension for workers, accident insurance, and ensured holidays with pay for workers. Number of working hours fixed for 8 hours. These initiatives improve living conditions of the workers and reduce social tensions and unrest. Other reforms included allowing women to file for divorce without a specific cause, simply because they wanted to. Capital punishment was abolished, foreign debts paid off, strengthened the currency of the country, freedom of the press, construction of railroads, banks, etc. Now, between 1900 and 1930, Uruguay had developed into a welfare state, and this meant that the state was responsible for much of the social welfare of its citizens and depended on income from custom duties rather than direct taxes. So Uruguay had turned to be peaceful country and highly literate state with democratic practices. Yeah. So one government succeeding the other through peaceful election, and these were significant. And of course, as we were talking about changes, modernization, you see how it reflected in the countries under discussion. Now, it is essential to note that Bache did not carry out any land reform. This was because if he did, he would have to challenge the domination of the William Blanco party, who owned large estates and cattle. So also he did not reform the tax system in China one. That was why he depended heavily on custom duties rather than direct tax system like income taxes. Now let's look at Brazil's experiment with republicanism and Vargas dictatorship. So Vargas dictatorship. Vargas, um, I think we have to end here today. We have to end here so that next time we can start from Vargas. Vargas dictatorship. Yeah, if you want, yeah, next time I think we have to start from Vargas. Or should we finish Vargas? Let me see. Now let's end at Vargas so the next time we look at Vargas.
Yeah, sir. It will be better if we stop there and then keep on
He
asking.
said,
I said I concur with the decision that you are making now.
yeah, so that we can next time continue from Vargas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can continue from Vargas. Yeah, so some of these things are some of these things are just straightforward, and the slides are straightforward and simple.
Yeah.
Simple thing. We are talking about the achievement of some of these corderos and the rest. They are straightforward, and so I just need to follow the lecture slides, and
Okay.
yeah, so that things will become very simple. So it's the slide that we use to entertain the questions. So once you
Okay.
have the slides and you go through it, and you
Okay.
attend class and you go to the slide, you should do better. Should do well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So basically, we are talking about. So we look at the old and new. So old period, that's before 1850 and after 1850, the changes that came, the influences and the ideas and all that. And so it reflected in all these Latin American states. That's why we are looking at them and some of the changes. And these men, yeah, these leaders, what they did, and significantly that changed because we mentioned these changes and all that. So then when you go through carefully, after this, go over carefully, then you realize that some of the changes, some of the things that they did, the reform they brought in education, all that will tell that there was a significant change, hence modernization in Latin America. At first, there was nothing like that, but now we see some of these issues. What influenced them? What were the impacts? I think I've gone through all these issues, so I wish that you go over them again, and let's try and do our best. At least it's not easy working at the same time learning, but I think gradually we're making it. I think this is our last semester, or this is our last. This after this we graduate, we get our
Okay.
certificate. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Thank you, sir.
yeah, I think we will end here. Go over if next time you have issues to ask. But
Okay.
basically, that is all the things order on modernization and the things they did that demonstrate and very simple. So we'll just be asking you questions that are conspicuous. And so if I ask you to, okay, I think these are the things, except that the things are many, but I think we manage it anyway. On that note, I think we can end here and continue next time. But if anyone has something to say, you can say before we end the class. Okay, so in the absence of anything, I think we'll end the class here and oh, continue next time. Okay, so we are even 5 now. Okay, I think we'll end here and continue next time. I wish you all the best and enjoy
Okay.
the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
We
you,
also
sir.
appreciate.
So I think I've already given you the lecture slide. You have it.
Yes, yes, please. We have all of them.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much.